Alright, Lions, so the limited time trial game mode has been out for around 2 or so days as of me recording this video, and since then, we've now completed all 15 trials on both towers. I did start late, so for the most part, we did do this in under 24 hours, and if you are someone that wants to rush through this, there's a few things to keep in mind, that way you can get the most out of your characters to clear as fast as possible. But remember, this is a 20-day event. You don't need to do this all in one day, you don't need to do this all in one sitting, and you also do have plenty of time to beat it. Remember, the way this trial game mode does work as opposed to the current normal type trial is that the limited time one does have, in a way, a stamina system on characters. They're called deployment points, and every time you use a character on one trial and complete said trial, it will cost you 1 deployment point for that character, and they do recover said point every 18 hours, stacking up to 2. So what this does mean is that you have to be a bit strategic to a certain extent on where you want to use certain characters. Going in with your best characters on trial number 1 isn't really going to be that beneficial because you might need them later on. Now, of course, like already stated, the deployment cost does recover, but if you are someone that wants to beat it as fast as possible, there's a few things you want to keep in mind. So for starters, I would say keep in mind 3 SR characters. Characters that I think are going to get good usage now. As the game goes by though, as you collect more characters, you probably won't even need to use any SR characters. Let's say 6 months from now, when you have plenty of new SSR units, you can probably clear this entire tower, all 15 trials, with just 15 individual SSRs. But in my opinion, given that the first 3 trials are relatively easy, this does give you good opportunity to use good SR characters like Ichigo, Ururu, and maybe even Renji. Now personally, I didn't really use Renji much, so I didn't really invest in him, but the 2 characters that I did use for trial 1, 2, and 3 were SR Ichigo and also Ururu. Now my investment on these characters are very limited. They're both level 50, they both have max boundary, but their weapons are only level 20, their skills aren't even fully leveled up, and their stamps for the most part are just the bare minimum. But that minimum investment was all I really needed to beat this particular trial. So in this case, for trial number 1, we did strictly use Ururu. Now this does take quite a while. We didn't clear through it as fast as possible. Maybe I could have invested into Ururu more, but I didn't mind using this character here because, truth be told, I don't really get to use this character all that much. Rightfully so, she is quite a bad character, but a level 50 Ururu was pretty much enough for me to clear trial number 1 by herself. Going into trial number 2, it does give slash damage bonus, or more so, non-slash characters take less damage, so in this case, a good opportunity to use SR Ichigo. And since I did use Ururu in trial number 1, I realized it was taking a bit longer than I'd like, even though I am clearing relatively safe. So I did decide to use SR Orihime, overall just for that survivability aspect, but also the damage boost that she can give through the attack passive boost. And what I really like about this game mode right now is that it is really giving me early day Senkamon vibes of on Bleach Brave Souls, where 1, you are rewarded for having a wide, varied roster, but also it does let you use characters that maybe you don't get to use all that much. And that could probably be seen in the future too. When we do get a bunch of new SSRs, you might find yourself going back and using old SSRs to clear some of the easier trials. But trial 2, and also therefore trial 3, was relatively easy, just strictly using Ichigo and also Orihime. When trial 4 came around, this is when I found out that I couldn't really continue using my SR characters, as I didn't really invest in them enough. At this point, I started to use SSR characters, and we started off using SSR Bankai Ichigo strictly by himself, no need to bring any damage bonus characters. I have worked on him quite a lot, so he very easily cleared trial 4 and also trial 5. Now the reason why I was using Ichigo relatively early is because I do have access to Kenpachi. So in this case, again, rewarded for having multiple characters here, as I was allowed to use Ichigo early on, and then I saved Kenpachi for later on. If you don't have Kenpachi, you can't really do that, but it's not that big of a deal. If you did use Ichigo for trial 4 and 5 like I did, you could just come back 18 hours and then use him again. Again, you aren't restricted from clearing this entire trial for not having all the new SSRs, but it is going to take longer, but you have plenty of time to do that. For trial 6, we did go ahead and use Kaname, and to make sure we get the most damage output out of Kaname, we did actually use a full team. With 2 Frost characters and a team of 3, we are getting Kaname's Frost damage bonus, and in this case, I did decide to use Rengiku for the damage boost, and then we did use Renji for a technical main DPS, but what you will see later is that I do decide to use Uryu. In my opinion, I recommend using Uryu, not because he's better per se, but he is a ranged character, so he is much safer to use as he won't be taking that much damage. If you haven't worked on the character like I have, for example, you might find Renji taking too much damage, and the reason why you would want to use a character like this is because you do want to use them to build up Kaname's battlefield skill. So Renji and Uryu later on aren't really here to do damage, they're just there to allow Kaname to deal more damage. But that was enough for Trial 6. Going into Trial 7, we did use Toshiro, as it is a spirit damage bonus. Once more, this is when we started to use some support characters, so Ruki allowed us to get a 15% all-type damage bonus, and then Momo is supporting Toshiro through crit rate and also spirit damage. Trial 8 is where we first now decided to use Kenpachi, mostly because Trial 8 does give a slash and strike damage bonus, and I've not really worked on any strike characters. You probably could get away using Yoruichi here, maybe even by herself, or at least alongside Sajin, but I've not worked on them, so at this point I was kind of forced to use a character like Kenpachi, as I pretty much had no other option, but Kenpachi is the Kenpachi, so he clears pretty much by himself. Trial 9, we did have the option between Kenpachi or a Frost character. In this case, I went back to my Frost team, where this time I did decide to use Uryu for, again, the important fact that he can stay alive much easier than Renji. But having said that, I did find myself dying with Uryu, which is kind of funny, right? Also keep in mind, when up against the Kenpachi boss fight, he does have an absolute nuke if you don't deal enough damage to him. Maybe you would want to save your Bankai for that particular moment. Kaname's Bankai, right? I didn't, so I was forced to take some damage with Rangiku. Had to sacrifice her, that way Kaname could actually finish the quest by himself. Fortunately though, the way Rangiku's buff does work is that even though she was defeated by Kenpachi, we were still getting damage from her because the Ash Blade was already applied. Trial 10, I think, is the first noticeable quest where you really have to use a good team of 3 here, mostly because Mayuri is by far one of the worst boss fights in the game. Nemu can appear at random and significantly slows down the run, and then if that wasn't any worse, once you do defeat Mayuri, you then have to fight his Bankai, Ashisogi Jizo. Doing that all in 3 minutes is a little bit tough, especially if you are limiting your characters here. So this was the first time I had to take out a full team, and in this case I did use Aizen and also Toshiro. Trial 11 is the first time that we get to see Noritora in-game. Pretty cool to see him, can't wait to see him be playable, especially in his resurrection state. But to make it more accurate as possible, we brought Kenpachi. Just to make it faster, I don't think it was even needed. I also did bring Yachiru, as she does give a good damage buff to Kenpachi. Kenpachi again is such a good character, this trial was relatively easy. And then going into Trial 12, this is where we had to bring a Slash or Frost character. At this point, all my Slash characters were resting, so we did decide to finally use Gin. I was now at the point where most of my characters were running out, and I knew I would have to come back after 18 hours, so that's why we did not only just use Gin, we also did bring Kisuke just to get the most damage out of Gin and clear Trial 12 relatively easy. Trial 13 was the last trial that I was able to clear that day, and since we did have more damage for spirit characters, I decided to go with a 4 DPS Aizen build, and who should be surprised, it worked relatively great. Trial 13 wasn't too bad, and then now going into Trial 14 and 15, this is where again I had to wait 18 hours for my character to recover. Luckily though, Trial 14 is a Slash damage bonus, and Trial 15 is a Frost damage bonus, so all I needed to do was wait for Kenpachi and Gin to get 1 more deployment cost. After 18 hours though, we did use Kenpachi and also Kisuke. Of course you can use Ichigo here, but Okura is actually a very difficult fight, mostly because the attacks that he does stagger your characters a lot, and with Kenpachi's gameplay, he's almost never not using attacks, either a special attack, an enhanced technique, or a technique, or even the ultimate. So that did make the Okura boss fight relatively trivial, and then that meant going into Trial 15, I could simply use Gin and also Kisuke, but since it's our final trial, we might as well throw Kaname in there, and boom, we cleared relatively easy as well. So using that strategy, that's how pretty much I was able to clear all 15 trials in pretty much under 24 hours. In one sitting, we were able to do 13 trials. So in the future, maybe after a few more characters do release, I'm probably able to beat all 15 in just one sitting. Which likely means in the future, we will turn this into some live streams. Honestly, like I said, this is actually one of my favorite game modes in the game right now, because you do have to think even just a little on what character you want to use to save for later. Again, if you like playing this game a lot, and you've progressed far enough into the game, majority of your gameplay loop, more so, is that you go in, spend your stamina, progress, work on some characters, log off. If you want to play the game for longer than 20 minutes in one sitting, this game mode pretty much allows that. I think it took like an overall an hour plus. And honestly, I had a lot of fun. Even using some SR characters that, again, I didn't really work on until now, just for the sole purpose of saving some better characters later on. So in the future, likely because you've already started the trial, definitely get some usage out of your SR characters, at least for the first 3 trials, because that does save you some characters later on. Again, you only really need to do that though if your idea is to clear as fast as possible. If not, just use one team for the entire 20 days. You have plenty of time to do that. But like I said, if you want to clear it as fast as possible like I did, using some of those SR characters does save you up 3 slots, and that's multiple hours, days saved in a way. I mean, technically that's saving you like 54 hours of waiting time, right? And again, what I really do like is that despite both trial towers being available at the same time, maybe in the future, for like big occasions, they could do a 3rd tower, is that they do take their own deployment costs. So me using a character here in the 2nd trial for gold doesn't waste time on this trial tower. So in a way, also, it's more content due, and again, the rewards are actually pretty good, with the possibility of them changing every now and then. Honestly, I think this game needed this game mode the most, and I'm looking forward to having it reset in 18 days' time. But either way, that's the video for today. Let me know how far you progressed in the trial towers. Have you already finished them? I'm curious to know, and I'll see you lads next time. Take care, and peace.